Hi everyone, this is Koinzell here. So I've done 2 Yoimiya guides so far. First one is just a simple math based on Thundering Pulse. After that we have the Hamayumi F2P guide. So today we are going to do weapon comparison. We are going to do comparison between Thundering Pulse, Rust, and Hamayumi. Okay, so in my opinion, these are actually the best weapons in each of their category. 5-star weapon you have Thundering Pulse, 4-star weapon you have Rust, F2P weapon you have Hamayumi. Of course, for certain F2P players you may have Rust, and if that's the case, Rust is good. And I'll show you guys in the weapon comparison how the figures are like. And you can decide for yourself how you want to build Yoimiya based on these figures. Okay. Now, before I continue, I've already shown the stats for Yoimiya for Thundering Pulse previously. I've shown the stats for Hamayumi too. I've shown the stats for Hamayumi too. So now we have Rust. I'm just going to quickly run through Rust. So Rust is very nice because of this refinement effect where you have increased normal attack damage ranging from 40 to 80% between R1 to R5. It has a attack percent substat. Base weapon damage is about average for a 4-star weapon. 565 will be high at level 19. 510 is more average. 454 is the one that is low for a 4-star weapon. So I'll say 510 is at the midpoint. Artifacts wise, I gotta say, I actually reduced the crit damage we'll get from using Rust because unlike the Thundering Pulse that gives 66% crit damage, Rust doesn't. So it's not possible to get 240 crit damage with Rust versus on Thundering Pulse. And this already has a very high requirement of artifacts where you need 6 upgrades into CR, attack percent, and CD each on top of the base rolls. So this already requires you to have really good artifacts. Okay? Bear in mind this really needs you to have good artifacts. Okay? If not, if you want a realistic representation, it will be something like 115 or even lower, 120. But we'll talk more about that later. Let's just say based on ideal scenario, if you have good enough artifacts. For Rust, unlike the Hamayumi, we are able to use Shiminawa because there's no energy requirement tied to Rust, unlike Hamayumi and Thundering Pulse. Basically, you just don't need to care. Just use her elemental skill as and when you want to DPS with her, and you will get your 50% normal. Okay, there is a condition which is you need to have at least 15 energy, but that is definitely doable most of the time. So these are the damage sources that you have. Obviously, Rust, very nice. It has the same type of damage buff that the Thundering Pulse can provide. It has almost the same type of attack subset that the R5 Thundering Pulse can provide. So it's really losing out only on the 66% crit damage, assuming we are doing an R5 to R5 comparison, yeah? But even R1 to R1 comparison, it's still just losing out on the crit damage effect. Oh, it does have 20% more attack at R1 though, because the attack percent buff for Thundering Pulse varies from R1 to R5. Again, these figures do not include the Kazuha or the rest of the teammates buff. This is just to show you guys the potential if you include Kazuha with her. It will come into play in my next video when I talk about attack versus damage goblet. Alright, now let's look at the figures itself. So you have the first hit at level 9 elemental skill, 11.2k at C0R1 Rust. C0R5 Rust, you have 12.6k. If you are a spender who gets like C2, you get 14.5k. C3, you get slightly higher. Yeah, honestly speaking, level 12 versus level 9, the increase is not too much. Let me just move this a little. If the elemental skill effect, right, is not a separate damage modifier, the difference is actually very small, level 12 versus level 9. At least between C0 C1 for a full attack cycle, you see a better improvement each time. But still up to you as the player to decide whether you want to spend. I don't want to talk about spending on C0, C1 or C2, beyond C0, sorry. But I'll say this, her C1 and C2 are definitely good enough if you typically already are a character who don't mind, oh sorry, a player who doesn't mind spending. Okay, so full attack cycle you have 67k, C0R1 Rust, C0R5 Rust you have 75.8k, and if you get a C2 you have 87k. If you get a C3 you have 89k. Honestly speaking, if you are a low spender, I definitely recommend C2. You'll see the best optimum place to stop is pretty much here. In fact, the weapon is more important. Now, if it's a separate damage modifier, these are the figures you get. It gets better, obviously, if it's a separate damage modifier. And when it comes to full attack cycle, Rust actually does pretty nicely. You have 87k, C0R1 Rust, C0R5 you already hit 100k in 3 seconds. And if you have C3, it goes even higher. But pretty nice for Rust to perform in this manner with this type of artifacts. Now let's just say we go more realistic. Let's drop it to 150 crit damage. So you have 8 upgrades that can go wrong versus 4. Your damage figures then drops, obviously. So previously we had 123k here at C3 and R5, now it's 102k. Okay. Then all the other figures, so basically they all drop when you reduce your crit damage. So remember the 150% crit damage. Let's look at the C0 and R1, 72k, and you have a 83k here, okay, or 83.7k. For easy reference, let me put it back to 180% crit damage. Alright, there you go. You actually have much better figures. Now, if you are really unlucky, but you only have 120% crit damage, the 100k drops another 20k to 82k. So crit damage is really important for Yoimiya. In fact, it's important for every DPS character really. But yep, so this is the difference when we talk about having 60% less crit damage. But honestly, you should not be as low as 120, because your character has base 50, you're going to use a crit damage helmet. That is already 116%. So you have to be a super unlucky guy to only have 130% crit damage. 150% is going to be easily achievable. Even 180 I'll say is achievable. It's just that for most people, maybe what you lack is attack. Your attack might have to be sacrificed, your attack might be lower. But it's fine because at least you get a high crit damage figure. Okay, so this is Rust. We finished talking about the introduction of this video, we talk about Rust. Now let's look at all the damage figures in totality so that it makes more sense. Okay, so here we have Thundering Pulse versus Rust versus Hamayumi. And of course I have the Hamayumi ER Sense as an option here. But in my previous video on Hamayumi, I already mentioned that you should not be using ER Sense, you should be using Attack Sense with just a little bit of ER on your Yoimiya, and use Electro Traveler together with a Pyro Battery to make sure that you are always able to have your burst, always able to have your energy full when your Hamayumi, when your Yoimiya's elemental skill is ready after its cooldown, while you are still constantly using her burst, so that you make sure that you use her full kit. Obviously C1 will be better. Right now these figures are still assuming that you're not using that, but like I said, that is still the best option. Okay, so let's look at what makes sense here. Let me just freeze this. Hang on. Right, so the damage that we have here, these are the figures, and you'll see with all the different type of permutations. Let's just look at the level 9 first. So C0R1, Thundering Pulse, you have 15.2k versus Rust 11.2k versus Hamayumi at 10.29k, sorry, 10.3k. So Hamayumi actually falls off from Rust just a little at R1. Because we're talking about 32% versus 40%. Again, this is assuming that you do that nice comp that I talk about. And if you go for C2, well, some people they prefer not to roll a weapon banner. So C2 and R1, you have 70.7k versus 13k versus 11.1k. And then you obviously have the Hamayumi ER. I'm not going to talk about the Hamayumi ER when I compare. It is just to show you guys as a reference so you know how it looks like. Generally speaking, the ER sense will always be worse off than the attack sense. Okay. If you pull for C3, C3R1, Thundering Pulse versus Ras versus Hamayumi, you see the difference is starting to get more when you go C3. Why? Because C3 you get higher elemental skill, you get a 20% attack, and you get another 25% pyro. It starts to make more difference the more attack bonus and damage bonuses that you have, because of the difference in their damage bonus figure between Ras and Hamayumi, as well as their attack figures. Okay, so Hamayumi, just a quick recap, is only 454 base attack, although it has a slightly higher attack percentage, but it's 454 base attack, versus Rust, which has 510. Right? If you go R5, again there's a difference about 2 plus K, and bear in mind this is just the first hit in Yoimiya's attack, and obviously Thundering Pulse does the best because the crit damage is also higher. All of these figures here is based on 60% CR and 180% crit damage. Okay, and also the attack figures that I talk about. So let's look at full attack cycle. Full attack cycle, this is 91k. This has already been corrected to remove the A4 effect. In my very first Yoimiya math video, I did include the Yoimiya A4 effect, which is not correct because Yoimiya's A4 effect only gives the attack buff to her teammates, not to herself. Okay, so this is how the damage figures look like. So we have 91k versus 67k versus 61k. So the 5-star weapon Thundering Pulse actually has a pretty huge lead over the next two 4-star weapons, the Ras and Hamayumi. Hamayumi's damage figure will always be lower than Rust because Rust is just that good. Okay, so this is a very good view for you guys to see Rust versus Hamayumi. But obviously Rust is only from gacha, so you need a bit of luck to get it, number one. Number two, if you're an F2P player who's been playing this game for quite some time, you should have more than R1 Rust. Of course, you can be unlucky and not even get a single Rust, but okay, I'm not going to talk about outlier, unlucky stuff, etc. But let's just say, assuming you have R5 Rust, this is type of damage figures that you can see. In fact, you can even compare C0 R1 versus C0 R5 Rust. Yeah? We don't need to always compare the same row. You can just look at all these different damage figures. And you can permutate accordingly how you like. Just bear in mind that the C1 Hamayumi here, I did not include the C1 effect because again, like I said, I have to provide the view of not using the burst. But I really do think that you should use a burst with Electro Travel and Pyrometry. And if that's the case, you should add a 20% attack to this. There should be a 20% attack to this. Okay. So again, the Thundering Pulse typically does a lot better than Rust. Rust does better than Hamayumi. And yeah, Hamayumi is the worst. So these are the type of damage figures that you can expect on average in one full attack cycle in 3 seconds at level 9 elemental skill. Of course, if you go C3, the damage figure will definitely increase per weapon permutation, but it's not huge. If you see 73 versus 5k, 89 versus 7k, so what does this tell you? If elemental skill is not a separate damage modifier, C3 is actually pretty bad. Okay. Now let's say if it's a separate damage modifier, then you have 19.6k versus 14k versus 13k at C0 R1 for each of the weapon. If you want to compare C0 R1 Thundering Pulse versus C0 R5 Rust. This is the comparison. 19.6k versus 16.7k. You can also compare C0 R5 Hamayumi versus C0 R1 Thundering Pulse. That's like 19.6 versus 14.8k. So up to you to decide how you like it. If you like Thundering Pulse, if you like this damage figure, if you like the design of it, then go ahead. If not, if you are pure F2P, this Hamayumi is actually a pretty nice option, seeing as it is lower than Rust, but not by that much. And then these are the figures on a full attack cycle. C0R1, we have 117k in 3 seconds, very nice. R5 Rust allows you to hit the 100k. Hamayumi unfortunately doesn't. Hamayumi is falling a bit short of 90k. Okay, these are the damage figures. So you got one that's 117k, 100k, and then 90k or 89k. Full attack cycle at C3, if you're someone who bothers to get C3. These are the type of damage figures that you'll be expecting. So all in all, Rust is not too bad, really. It's definitely better than Hamayumi. But Hamayumi is also not too bad. It doesn't fall off too much from Rust. And obviously Thundering Pulse is OP because of the fact that it has crit damage as substat, it has attack percent, is refinement effect, and then the 80% crit damage, or 40% crit damage, depending on R5, on the weapon effect. So Thundering Pulse is a very strong weapon. I myself is looking forward to getting R5 from Thundering Pulse to test out with Child as well, because I actually have Shiminawa artifacts farmed together with this Thundering Pulse for my Child, and I'm gonna get 100% more damage on the normal attack, just the damage bonus itself, not the actual damage. But I did a quick calculation. I'm probably gonna do at least 50% more damage. More than 50%, sorry. More than 50% more damage in terms of actual damage effect. Damage bonus itself is 100% more on the normal attack if I switch to Shiminawa plus Thundering Pulse on Child. So anyway, don't worry, I'll do a playtest on the Child when we get it as well, and I'll do a video about it too. But this has been the Yoimiya weapon comparison video. So these are all the damage figures. Feel free to pause and check anytime that you want, based on the different permutations and the level of the elemental skill. So I'm confident that this will be a helpful video, and I've already given my TLDR. Basically, let me just repeat one more time. Thundering Pulse is OP. Rust is usable, but obviously it falls off a lot. You should look at C0, right? It falls off a lot even with a R5 Rust versus C0 R1 Thundering Pulse will still do better. Then you have Hamayumi, which is not too bad, but obviously it will do worse than Rust. But at least it's F2P, right? It's fully F2P. It's not from Gacha. Rust is still from Gacha, even though it's a 4-star. And Thundering Pulse OP. Alright, so I hope this video guide has been helpful to you guys for the weapon comparison. So at least you know whether you want to go for Rust or you want to go for Hamayumi, or if for some reason you think that Rust is actually good enough. Shouldn't put it that way. For some reason, if you think that Rust is on par with Thundering Pulse, this shows you that it's not. But R5 Rust versus R1 TP the difference is still bigger than, say, Rust versus Hamayumi, but the damage figure I feel is acceptable. C0 R1 Rust does give you 67k in 3 seconds. Not too shabby for like a almost F2P setup if you're using R1 Rust. If you have R5 Rust, this applies for lucky F2P players and L2P players. You should have R5 Rust, so that's 75.8k versus 91k using Thundering Pulse. And if I were you, obviously you don't even need this comparison, but maybe you don't feel like spending your resources on Thundering Pulse, and this is to show you that Thundering Pulse does have a big difference versus Rust if you're talking about R5 versus R5. If you talk about R1 Thundering Pulse versus R5 Rust, obviously Thundering Pulse will still do more damage, but yeah, these are the type of comparison. So anyway, thanks everyone for watching. I hope this video has been helpful to you. If it is, remember to like the video and click subscribe for more, yeah? Alright, bye!